Hello everyone and welcome to this video. I hope you're all well. As you can see from the title of this video, I'm going to be talking about colonization, colonization of our minds, and also decolonization, and why we need to be decolonizing our minds in particular. So those of you who don't already know me, my name is Dylan McCabe and I work with Spirit on a daily basis, and I post quite often over on Instagram, where some of you may already know me from. More so over the past few years, I've been working quite intently with ancestors, the ancestors of the land in particular. I'm based currently in England, in the UK, and yes, the ancestors of the land I feel are very chatty here these days, and I'm feeling that they are all over the world actually, but this is my little corner of the world. This is where I live, so that's where I'm coming from as I'm talking about this. That's my kind of base, that's where I'm speaking from my experience. So I've worked with energy for over 10 years now, and have worked as an energy healer. I've worked with tarot, I work doing ancestor readings, and all of those things involve a level of connection with energy, with spirit. And I also teach quite often as well through my posts on Instagram, often really channeling wisdom that I feel comes through rather than it coming from me. It's more that it comes through me. And as I was out walking this morning, I had a lot of things coming through, a lot of ideas. Quite often I will ask for guidance of some kind as to what to speak about, how to work, how I can be of service really. And I'll often get signs and messages from nature, also from the ancestors of the land, as I mentioned, and nature spirits as well, which can sometimes be kind of put together as one and the same, but that's maybe a topic for another video. So yeah, those of you who have been following me for a while on Instagram may know that I have been reading the Boudica series of books by Amanda Scott. And I recently finished the last book in that series. If you haven't read the books, I highly recommend them. This is the final book, Dreaming the Serpent Spear. The first one is called Dreaming the Eagle, so that's the best place to start. And as you can see from the title, there's an element of dreaming within these books. And our ancestors all over the world, it doesn't really matter where you're from, the indigenous peoples of every country worked with dreaming and worked with that kind of sense of freedom really, of being able to project outwards, not just be hemmed in, I guess, by the mind all of the time. And there were people who were particularly skilled in this, who were trained, who often went away to certain places, particularly, as it's called now, Anglesey, or it was called then Mona, where people would go and train for a very long time in order to be able to work with the dreaming, to be able to work with energy, and work with prophecy and healing and all of those things that actually many of us are now very much interested in, in this day and age. If you think about the spiritual movement that has expanded, particularly over the past 10 years, I would say it's really exploded. People who are very interested in things like tarot and astrology and energy healing and drum circles and shamanic healing and all of those things. It's I just heard the word then as I said that, resurgence. There's a resurgence of these things, and there are a lot of messages coming through from the land, from the ancestors of the land, from our ancestors all over the world. A lot of messages coming through, leading us really to remember, or encouraging us to remember our capabilities and who we are, and what we're really about, rather than just being hemmed in and this kind of we just work and then we die kind of lifestyle that we seem to have been fenced in to over the many years, hundreds of years, thousands even. So the Boudica series of books sparked in me some realizations. They have been very thought-provoking and also stirred up a lot of emotion, actually, for me, where, as I was just talking about, there's this sense of remembering how things were before we were very much, I guess, indoctrinated and squared off. They're the words that come through. We think about the way that our ancestors used to live. They would live in round houses. You think about other countries. We have the Mongolian yurts, which are round. We have Native American teepees. We have, lots of structures, even caves that we lived in before that don't have straight edges. They don't have right angles. That very much came in with Roman civilization, and it's really interesting that I've watched a few interviews with Manda Scott, who wrote the Boudica series, and she talks about how the Roman era never really ended. We talk about in history there's a period where the Romans were very active, and then there was the fall of the Roman Empire, and then we're led to believe that that just disappeared. But energetically, as an energetic legacy, it never really ended, and we're still very much living in those times of being held captive. I don't know whether that's the right term to use, but in this kind of colonized space that we live in. When the Romans moved through much of Europe and into Africa and other countries as well, they destroyed a lot of ancient cultural practices and quashed and squashed ancient spirituality. They did away with the Druids. It's one of the most famous things that they did when they came over to the British Isles, was attack and slaughter the Druids, who were the I guess we could call them the priests of the day. They were the ones who were the most in touch with spirit. Of course, the Romans didn't want any of that happening because they actually feared the Druids. Definitely what I've picked up on from what I've read, what I've watched, and what I can feel energetically and intuitively, that they are actually very afraid of the Druids, because the Druids could influence outcomes on the battlefield. And this was also truth in other countries as well, with other ancient cultures, when they would have, good to call them shamans, in different areas of the world. Shamans are able to manipulate energy and manipulate outcomes. And manipulate, I don't mean it can be used in a malign way, but I'm talking about benign actions as well, where things can be shifted and altered and changed. And this is a capability that we actually all have, and that we've been led away from knowing and realizing. So I believe the Romans were actually afraid of the Druids. And what the Roman Empire didn't squash during their actual physical time span on the planet, Roman Christianity came through and kind of did the rest. So if we think about then, because the Romans didn't go up into Scandinavia, for example, Roman Christianity did eventually. And so we've got this same kind of ordered, restrictive viewpoint and approach to life and spirituality. So a lot of our original spirituality, our original practices, were based around the land and the seasons and the cycles of the land, and our lives were definitely very cyclical. And as I just talked about, with the structures that we lived in round structures, no sharp edges, no hierarchy. There was no upstairs and downstairs. It was very much about all being together and living within a culture. And also another thing that I want to say is that, people may look back sometimes on history and see our ancient tribal ancestors as savages or barbarians, and really, when we look far enough back and when we actually look at some of the culture that comes through, we don't have written culture because our ancestors didn't write down their experiences. They passed things on orally through storytelling and through song, and a lot of that, of course, was wiped out. If you wipe out a generation, then that generation can't pass on those songs to the next generation, or the stories. But if we look at the art that was created in terms of metalwork, I mean, some of the pieces, and these aren't just pieces, not just weapons that were used for war, but the torques that they wore, like the neck pieces, absolutely beautifully created. And a lot of the things that were sacrificed to the gods as well, handed over as gifts to the gods. Gold and other precious metals were thrown into lakes and into rivers to honour the spirits of the land. And a lot of these things were incredibly ornate and beautiful. And a lot of these things were also buried with the dead as well. So there was a really strong culture of veneration when it came to the dead, to ancestors, and making sure that people moved into the afterlife in a smooth way and had everything that they needed, and that they were remembered and honoured. So we have all of this, when we look back, and some people, like I just said, might say that these ancient cultures were just savages, but where have we heard that before? If we think about colonisation in a more recent sense, for example, various countries in Europe, particularly the United Kingdom, let's call it, or Britain, Great Britain. We went to other countries and we colonised those countries, and we decided that the people in those countries were savages, barbarians, that they didn't know any better, and that they needed teaching, and that they needed, taking in hand, and very often being beaten, being attacked, traded, pushed into slavery, treated in awful, awful ways. So, when we maybe read sources from Rome that were written by Romans, maybe they're not so accurate when it comes to the portrayal of our ancient tribal ancestors as being savages. So we've moved through a lot of these things throughout our human history. A lot of oppression, a lot of suppression, repression, violence, holding other cultures down, disrespecting other cultures, cutting off whole lineages, destroying cultures, lots of these things. So we're actually still living in a time when this is taking place as well. This is actually very present in the world at the moment. Cultures wanting to squash and destroy other cultures, often for land, often to just have control over other people, and often for resources as well. If we think about wars that happen when people invade another country in order to take the resources of their land, which is exactly what the Romans did all that time ago in many countries. And we're still doing it now. If we think about it in a broader sense, outside of war, as a society, or as the human race, as a collective, we're still taking those resources from the land at a rate that is unsustainable, and has been unsustainable for a very long time, and taking and taking and taking, and living in a very unbalanced way. So that's another way in which this colonial, colonized kind of experience is still playing out in today's world. And we live under many rules and regulations. More and more freedoms are being taken away. It seems like almost weekly that something else comes along that we're not allowed to do anymore. If we look at things in terms of Brexit, for example, means that now people from the UK, like myself, for example, I can't just travel freely in Europe now, or work freely in Europe. There has to be like a work permit, and you can only stay for a certain amount of days, and then you have to leave. And it's like, it's almost as though, although the world is expanding because we can connect with people all over the world, it's also getting smaller because there are more regulations about what we can and can't do. We're also encouraged to fear the world, to fear and mistrust others. We've only got to look at the media to see how we are conditioned in a way to fear the world, what's happening. We're all told about all these awful things that happen all the time. And it's not to say that they don't happen, but to be constantly focused on fear and lack means that we live in a kind of survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you can't think clearly, you can't create, you certainly don't feel free. And so we're living in a world where we often feel very restricted. I don't honestly believe there are many people in this world that would genuinely say that they feel free. Of course, like, this is what I'm getting onto now as well. What we need to be doing really, if we want to be free, if we want to feel truly free, is expanding our minds, allowing our spirits to expand, and also taking away some of these energetic binds and shackles that many of us are wearing and have been wearing for a very long time without probably without even knowing. Even, down to things like food being controlled. I mean, what would happen if all of the supermarkets, for some reason, there had to be a law, something had to happen where the supermarkets were just closed? What would we do? How many of us actually grow our own food? So our food supply is controlled. What goes into the food is very often controlled. This is why many people are focusing on food sovereignty now and wanting to grow their own food and have their own land, which again has restrictions around it which make it difficult. So these are lots of ways in which we are kind of hemmed into this work and worry and lack and strive and mistrust and fear. These are all of the things that are keeping us hemmed in, and they keep our minds kind of restricted. And if you think, one of the images that came to me this morning when I was out walking, which was quite unpleasant actually, was the image of the pigs that are kept in factory farms, and they're kept in crates, and they can't turn and they can't move, they can't do anything but just stand, they can't even lie down to sleep. In a way, like, it was a visual representation that I got of how our minds are held and gripped by fear when we allow them to be. And I've noticed that the more that I've worked with decolonising my own mind, stepping away from this restricted idea of how we need to live, I've noticed that a lot of fear has come up within myself and other people that I speak to as well who are doing this work. Lots of fear can come up around survival, around staying safe and making sure we've got enough food, and a lot of this comes from this lack mentality that most of us are raised with, and this fear mentality. So the energetics of this, because I work with energy, I wanted to talk about the way that this shows up energetically in our own energy fields. So the way that I've experienced it and that I can feel it happening around me is almost like they're very dark, kind of black, insidious tentacles. And I've done some energy work myself with this. That there's one type which is very much like a grip, which we have, that grips our minds and leads us to believe that we're always unsafe and we always have to be on guard and hypervigilant, and that the world is just an unsafe place. When the world is actually a very beautiful place. Of course, we don't want to be completely naive and say, oh, no one would ever hurt me. We just have to be discerning with this. But it is a very beautiful place, but we are led to believe that it's just frightening and that it's just hard and that we just need to be in fear all the time. So there's this sort of, if you imagine like a hand, a very big hand, bigger than mine, gripping our minds, and there's almost like tentacles as well, and they're like black insidious tentacles. That's the way that I experience this, almost like an energy that keeps us frozen, that keeps us stuck, and that keeps us fearful. So that's getting into our minds. And another way that I experienced it when I was doing some cord cutting work from a particular organisation, let's say, connected to the government, I felt and perceived in my mind's eye all of these black ropes, almost chains, tentacles, just completely surrounding me and really really tight, just keeping me restricted. And this is the way that many of us are walking around, and this is what we're experiencing energetically without being aware of it. Now, I'm not saying this to frighten people, and maybe you're a person that doesn't have that level of control, but many people do. I can sense that, I can feel that, I can see that in my mind's eye. So cord cutting work would be fantastic if you feel that you want to decolonize your soul, your mind, your experience of life. Energy work is a fantastic way to do that. If you know how to do that yourself, you can absolutely do it yourself. You don't need a healer to do that for you. But if you do need support, there are energy healers that you can reach out to. You'll get a felt sense of who to work with, and perhaps they can then help you to take off these shackles, take off these ropes, these chains, get rid of these tentacles, like remove this energy, because a lot of it actually feels very parasitic in nature. So if you think about how, let's say for example, the Romans came, let's use the UK as an example, which wasn't the UK then, but you know what I mean, the British Isles, the Romans come over and they almost really become parasites in a way. They strip the land of its resources, they cut down the trees, they mine the gold and the lead and the tin and all of those things, and they strip the land. Not only that, but they also harvest people, so they're also taking slaves from the local tribal communities. And so if we see them in the sense of these parasites that come in and just suck the life out of the culture and the land, then this has happened elsewhere as well. It's not just Romans. I'm not just going to go on about the Romans the whole time, but just sucking resources out. So this is parasitic. And I don't often talk about this kind of thing, like the war between dark and light, but it is actually becoming more and more evident. And a lot of this power is taken from us, or we willingly actually give it without knowing that we're consenting to it, which is a bit of a loophole. Our energy is taken, it's sucked out of us. If we're just in fear all of the time, it's almost as though that fear is being harvested, and what it's being harvested by, I don't know. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm not really familiar with the ins and outs of all of that, but there is definitely a sense of being controlled and having this energy kind of pulled out of us in a way, but we are willingly giving it subconsciously. So it's a good time as well to be exploring where we are doing that, what it is that we are giving, and whether we can close those holes and stop giving our power and our energy away to whatever it is that's taking it. I mean, I guess we could, the face of it, the outward face of it would be the government, for example. That is the outward facing visual representation that we can get of whatever's behind the scenes. So I feel like we're being invited. This is moving into a bit more of a almost like an energy forecast now, but this is what I'm picking up on energetically. We are being invited by the ancestors of the land, who I feel very strongly rising at this time, calling to us to listen, to pay attention, to remember, to relearn, to reclaim our power, our individual power, and that power that we can then bring together as a collective. They're calling on us to break these ties, these shackles, to drop them, to let them go, to close up these holes in our energy fields that our energy is being siphoned from. We're being invited to smooth the edges. This is what I picked up on this morning as well. So if you think about what I was talking about with the right angles and the square buildings, the rectangular buildings, and how that doesn't allow for a natural flow of energy, I'm thinking like spirals of energy and circles of energy and a very cyclical nature, which I talked about before. If we can start to round the edges of our minds, then that's going to be really, really helpful. So this could be a visualization that could help. So imagine that our minds are quite square and that we've been fed a lot of beliefs and a lot of fear through the media and through various other means. If we can visualize rounding out our minds rather than having this square, rigid idea of how we can be and how we should live, I feel like that would be really helpful. Can we become circular, cyclical beings again? Can we kind of dance the spiral of life? Can we move in a circle, in cycles, rather than marching on kind of just in this linear sense with linear time? We're just not built for that. It's just not natural. If you think about our bodies, for example, there are no right angles in our bodies. There are no straight lines in our bodies. Everything is curved. Even bones, which appear to be kind of straight, they're curved. We don't have any bones that are, how am I doing this? Like this. It just doesn't work that way. And look at nature, trees, plants, rocks, everything. None of it has right angles. And so if we can move towards a more natural way of being and take ourselves out of this survival mode that keeps us very blinkered and very just focused on survival and what we can get and who's going to take this from us and we don't have enough and all of these things. If we can move away from that way of thinking, which can be difficult to detach from that because we're raised in it. We're in a kind of soup, energetic soup of this energy, and we see it everywhere, and we're told how to behave and what to do and almost sometimes what to wear and how to eat and all of these things. So it can be difficult to break away from that, but I believe it's incredibly necessary, more so at the moment than ever, I would say. And working with the ancestors of the land in the way that I do, and also the spirits of the land, the nature spirits, they're all saying the same thing. They're all coming through with the same thing, that there are ways in which we need to reclaim ourselves, reclaim our energy. And it doesn't necessarily that we have to do anything in terms of activism outwardly, if we don't feel to. Some people are activists, some people aren't, some people are leaders, some people aren't. The main thing that we can do, and I've asked this a few times when I've spoken to the ancestors or even the old gods that I work with, what can I do? What can I do? How can I be of service? And sometimes they just say, heal yourself. Heal yourself. Free yourself. The more of us that do that individually, that's like a domino effect then. And of course some of us are here to teach, some of us are here to lead, some are here to be activists. But the main thing that we can do is start with ourselves and really check in with what we're being controlled by, what we're allowing ourselves to be controlled by, what we are experiencing energetically. Have we got these ropes, chains, shackles, cages around us energetically that we need to dissolve and let go of? What do we need to be learning? What do we want to learn? What do we feel drawn to? What calls to us? What do we enjoy? Life can be about enjoying, about playing, about creating, and we're just generally not really taught that, are we? It's more about striving and pushing and attaining and achieving and accumulating, and then we die. And I don't know about you, but I'm not particularly interested in living in that way. And if you look around us, it's not doing anybody any favours to continue to live in that way. So, yeah, it's time to loosen that grip. It's time to feel into what calls to us. And we're all individuals. We have different things that appeal to us. We may feel drawn to a particular pantheon of gods, for example. We may feel attracted to a particular land and culture that calls to us. We may feel called to connect with nature in a deeper way. We may feel to write, we may feel to sing, to perform music, write poetry, we may feel called to dance. There are so many ways in which we can express ourselves and that we can reclaim ourselves. And I will say, one of the things that's definitely helped me over the past few years is music, and I think it's so beautiful that there are so many bands now, or artists, reviving a kind of like a sense of empowerment through music. So outside of the auto-tuned chart music, I'm talking about a lot of the, maybe we could call it neo-folk music. A lot of what I listen to is Scandinavian neo-folk music, and just any music that we can feel the flow coming through. Any music that, like, there have been certain artists and bands that I've listened to over the past few years that I can actually feel and hear the ancestors speaking through them, and I can feel the land, nature speaking through them, and these people, these musicians, are channeling that, and it's really very beautiful. So I definitely recommend checking out or feeling into any music that speaks to you. A lot of that music, because it's heavy on the drums, there's a lot of shamanic drumming, there's a lot of just like big heavy drumming. A lot of that can awaken our sense of rhythm. As I said, we are cyclical beings. We work in rhythms, we work in cycles, and so when we hear a rhythmic beat and we can move to that rhythmic beat, it brings us back to ourselves. And the ancients knew that. Our ancient ancestors, our tribal ancestors, all knew about the rhythm of the drums. They all knew about the cycles of day and night and summer and winter and all of those things. They worked with those rhythms of life. And we just can't survive as a species if we don't connect with the rhythm of life. We are nature. So check out music that calls to you. Have a listen to things that awaken your spirit. Dance to that music. Sing. Even if you think you can't sing, make sounds. We need to be reclaiming our voices. We need to be breaking out of perfectionism, because that is what absolutely destroys a sense of creativity. Perfectionism is, again, one of these rigid, right angle, limited things in our lives that really hold us back. Trying to be too ordered, trying to be too civilized, trying to be polite all of the time or nice all of the time. I know a lot of people who have that pattern, of just trying to be nice all the time, being people pleasers, and trying to fit into this narrow construct that we create for ourselves. And I just feel that we need to be re-embracing our, what's the word I'm looking for? Rawness. Re-embracing our wildness in any way that calls to us. And you may not feel confident enough to unleash your wildness in public yet, but you might like to just turn off all the lights in the house and light some candles and listen to some tribal music and dance and just stomp around the house and shake out and make crazy noises. And if you only feel comfortable doing that with yourself, by yourself, then do it. Something I've noticed very much that's come up over the past year or so is that sometimes we are not so much afraid of other people seeing us, but we're afraid of seeing ourselves. So when we feel like we're afraid to be seen, maybe it's actually more a sense that we're afraid to see our own truth. Or maybe when we feel afraid to be heard, we're actually afraid of hearing ourselves. And sometimes we can be afraid of our own power. And I wonder whether actually some of that has been drummed into us, so to speak, by some of this fear culture that we've lived in, this fear of power, even our own inner power, because the word power has been corrupted and used to manipulate other people, to subjugate other people, whole cultures and peoples and races. The word power has been used to dominate and control. But the power that I'm talking about, and the power that we really want to be focusing on as we're awakening and shifting, this is the power of, let's use the word sovereignty, the power that just feels clear. True power doesn't feel aggressive. True power isn't threatened by anything. And if you're not threatened by anything, you don't need to attack anything, So you could say that a lot of the attackers in this world, even right down to schoolyard bullies, are the ones who are the most afraid. And we only need to control, or feel we need to control other people, think we need to control other people, when we're actually insecure and afraid within ourselves. So, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover in this video. Most of all, I really want to encourage all of you, and I'll be right there with you, I'm doing it myself, to remove these shackles energetically, to keep checking in with where we're giving our power away, to keep checking in with what we are complicit in, what we are saying yes to by not saying no, because when we don't say no, we're saying yes to something. We're allowing, just to check out where we're allowing our power to leak out of us through fear. Often, there are thought forms that we create of things that we're afraid of. And maybe if we've heard a repeated message throughout our lives, either from parents or the government, society, whoever, then that thought form is there, and we give it power, and we feed it, and we feed it, and we feed it. We need to be drawing that power back in, letting that thought form disintegrate, destroy it, get rid of it, pull its power away. If we don't give power to something, it can't be. Everything exists through energy. Everything needs energy to survive. Everything is energy. And therefore, if we can pull our energy and our power back to ourselves, away from these fears and these cages and these thought forms that hold us stuck and controlled, then we can live freer lives, and we can decolonize our minds. I wanted to read a quote actually before I go, which is one of the definitions in the Oxford Dictionary as to what colonization is, and it says, the action of appropriating a place or domain for one's own use. And if we apply that to what I was saying about the mind being colonized, it's like our minds have been occupied by these fears that have been put there, and we've been held in a certain way of being, very restricted, like I said about that visual image of the pig in the pen, which is a horrible image, not being able to turn around and just not even being able to sleep, and just being exhausted and trapped. Many people live in this way, and I do feel that it's because our minds have been colonized and influenced, and all of these fears have been implanted. And if we don't give our power to those fears, if we decolonize our mind, if we take our space back, our domain of our mind back, if we reclaim our mind spaces, then they have no power. And this is a process. It's definitely a process. It's not something that can be done overnight. It's something, as I said, with my own experience, it can be something that can bring up a lot of fear. Some of the main fears are survival fears, like having nowhere to live, starving, like having no food, being ostracized, being completely alone. These are three very key survival fears. So we need people to survive. No matter how much of an introvert we are, we still need people. think about the food that we eat. We wouldn't have this food that we eat if other people weren't growing it, right? We wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for our parents. So, yeah, there are lots of things keeping this world going, lots of people keeping this world going, so we can't live in isolation. So this fear of isolation is one, and like I said, the fear of not having food or starving or not having the money to buy food, and homelessness, losing our homes, losing our possessions, and losing everything in that sense. And when we read or watch the news, which I tend not to do, we are fed through that medium, you know, all of these ways that we could lose our possessions and our homes and our food. And, you know, if we're different, then we might lose people as well. If we take a stand, it's probably, you know, we're given this message that, you know, people just are going to think you're weird or something wrong with you and you're going to be ostracized and you won't have anybody. That's not the case. Like, we always find the right people. Through being our authentic selves, through being our weird selves, if you want to call it that, talking about what we're truly passionate about, doing the work that we love, doing the things that we love on a day-to-day basis, that's the way in which we find our tribe, let's call it. And I love that a lot of people say your vibe attracts your tribe, which is quite a trendy saying now, but it's true. Your energy, if you're in your power, your fullness, your wholeness, you're going to attract people who are in the same space and who are also wanting to live a different way and to create and to live a more rounded, smooth life rather than these sharp edges and right angles. So yeah, let's reclaim, let's remember, let's recalibrate, I guess we could say. Let's reconnect. Another thing I'll say just before I go is, because I'm feeling very strongly that these ancestors, our ancient ancestors, are coming through to support us, and also more recent ancestors as well, because when people pass to the other side, they change. They lose their conditioning and they lose their entrapment, in a sense, because they're out of this society and this body and this rigid set of ideas now. So don't think that just because, let's say, your granddad is in spirit or your grandmother and they start connecting with you, don't assume that because they are, or they were, strict and rigid and probably very tied into the colonial system when they were alive, don't assume that they're going to be the same on the other side, which is a bit of a side thought there. But yeah, listen. I think that's the main message I want to say at the end of this video. Listen for the messages that are coming through. Observe nature. Observe the roundedness and the smoothness of nature. Absorb the energy that is healthy, you know. Cut off from all of that fear-based stuff. Of course we want to know what's happening in the world, and we do know what's happening in the world, but don't give you too much energy to it. Don't let it take your energy. Do what you can do on a daily basis. Do what feels right for you to do to help, and that might just be healing yourself to begin with, and that's okay. And yeah, read the signs in nature. Listen for guidance. Listen to those nature spirits. Listen to those ancestors of the land. They're all very, very animated and very insistent at the moment that we pay attention. And so we will. We'll pay attention and we will reclaim our energy and our power. So, thank you so much for listening to me, watching this video, and I hope you've picked up some things here that you feel are helpful and perhaps inspiring and helpful. As I say, helpful twice. If you're interested in my work, then you can go to my website, which is dylanmccabe.com. I'm also over on Instagram, Dylan R. McCabe, and as I said, I work with energy on a daily basis, whether that be for work or my everyday life, which are quite interwoven, and so I provide certain services on my website that you might be interested in that could help you to free yourself and live a life outside of fear and survival. So I'm sending you all much love, much encouragement for the path ahead, and I'll speak with you all again soon. Bye bye.